Good afternoon. I'm Lesley Orr, and this is the Full Scottish. I'm very pleased to be joined this afternoon by Marion Fellows, the MP for Motherwell and Wishaw, and also by Dr. Alan Flowers, who is based in London. He's a academic who has 35 years' experience on Ukraine and Belarus and issues around that whole region of which which is of course very much in the news this week, and he's apparently also the chair of the Anglo-Belarusian Society. So I'm very pleased to welcome both Alan and Marion. We'll be discussing some of the big international and national stories in the news this week. But I'll begin by updating the coronavirus status as of 2 p.m. yesterday, Saturday. In the past 7 days, 45,889 new COVID-19 cases have been confirmed by LFD or PCR test. In the past 7 days, 81 new reported deaths have been reported within 28 days of a positive test. 4,426,094 people have received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination. 4,141,713 have received their second dose, and 3,344,551 have received a third dose or booster. 888 people were in hospital with recently confirmed COVID-19, 22 of whom were in intensive care. And since the start of the pandemic, a total of 10,512 patients who tested positive have sadly died. Okay, well, as I said in my introduction, Alan is an expert. He's somebody who's worked for many years as a scientist and an academic in the field of relations with Ukraine, with Russia, and so it's great to have Alan here this afternoon with his expertise, given that that is the story which has really been dominating the news this week and up till today. The question, will Russia invade? And if so, when and where? The whole debate about this has been ramping up. We've been hearing Putin, we've been hearing Johnson. Western embassies are withdrawing their staff, and warnings to citizens of various countries to leave as soon as they can. So, Alan, just to turn to you first, do you think that Russia will invade Ukraine? And if so, is that imminent? Is that really going to happen within days or weeks?
The only person that's going to answer that question is Mr. Putin. And it may well be he still has not even yet made his mind up on these matters. We've had over 20 years to watch this man. We all know he's an opportunist. And I would, as an observer, now I first started observing Ukraine, Soviet Union, when I got closely involved with the Chernobyl matter, and that's now 35 years ago, hence the comment you made. I was in Belarus when Mr. Lukashenko was elected. I was present on the Maidan when Ukrainians were making their first 2004 efforts for independence. So I know the feeling of the Ukrainian people, and we can maybe make some comments later about the deep history and getting the history right. My concern is that Mr. Putin really convinces himself of some of what he says, which is a lot of historical inaccuracy about Russian rights on Ukraine. But also he has to confront the reality of the present situation. And I would say this time, the Western democracies are actually doing pretty well in terms of realizing you have to finesse and cut Mr. Putin off before he makes his move. I mean, people were sleeping in 2014, really were. And I was very taken by a comment of Lavrov's yesterday that the USA was waging a propaganda war against Russia. I mean, what about the irony in that one? Now, if Lavrov is getting rattled, he is having problems. And it must be very difficult. I mean, in fact, he may well be having to give advice to Mr. Putin, hold off. Putin is not a man just to keep on a blind track. He will adjust. He'll take use of opportunities. Of course, sometimes opportunities have been given that have made it quite clear he could take a grab, like Georgia 2008. By the way, I was in Tbilisi then, so I know what it's like to have a Russian tank 40 kilometers up the road from the capital you're sitting in. And the Russian soldiers then got quite a surprise. So I would actually say things have shifted in the last few days. And if I was to put the balance against war or no war, I would actually say we have moved, due to the actions and rhetoric of the West, nearer to the no war situation. But it's still balanced, and it's all going to be down to whether Mr. Putin decides he'll roll the dice and have a go.
Okay, that's interesting, Alan, and it's encouraging, of course, to hear that you think the likelihood or perhaps the balance is tipped in favour of there being no war. But you've already mentioned, some of the deep history. Could you say a little bit about why Putin might want to go to war? What's his interest in Ukraine? What would be the benefits of an invasion? And what are the risks as well?
Exactly. Very good question. I've often suggested to people, just turn the map of Europe round a little bit and pretend you're sitting in Moscow. What do you see? You see this very strong Europe pointing at you that has twice in relatively recent history, okay, we've got to go back to 1812 as well, but anybody who has visited the lands, particularly of Belarus and Ukraine, where most of the bloodiest of fighting took place, both in 1812 and in the period 41 to 45, knows the deep impact of war on these peoples. And of course, we're not just talking about the Russian peoples, we're talking about the Ukrainian peoples as well, who suffered hugely, greatly, greatest tank battle in history, Kursk, just southeast of Kiev. So a defensive posture, there is a mentality, a feeling of threatened mentality there, which we need in Europe, in the West, to take account of. And it is possible that in a way that of course that can be played on. It might not be a real threat, but that is something that is deep in the Russian people as a concern, and that's definitely what Mr. Putin's playing for. But his longer term history is a little bit weak, because it's actually, he's got to remember the history of Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the fact that until 1945, a large part of Western Ukraine never in history had been ruled from Moscow. It was Austro-Hungary before 39, and Poland before 39 for a brief period, and then prior to the First World War, Austro-Hungary, then Grand Duchy. Great long history there. Central Eastern Ukraine, different, but you've got a people that have living memory of the great famine induced by Moscow. So there is not a lot of love for control from Moscow in the overwhelming majority of the Ukrainian people. And that's where any invading army of military, young soldiers told they're going there to liberate the Ukrainian people, they're going to get a shock. And Putin's advisors must know this. This is not going to be a liberation. Now, he might think he's liberating the Ukraine, but he might have convinced himself of that. But basically, it's about the buffer state. He does genuinely want to ensure there is a neutral and protective region. Of course, he's played games with Finland for exactly the same reason. I mean, look at the map of Europe. There's that huge border with Finland as well. So he's got borders with the EU at the moment, and he's got a little bit of border, Estonia, Latvia, with NATO that he's having to deal with. So there we are. It's about the threat, the historical threat, a defensive mentality, but about a historical spin to the Russian people, who should know better because they've got relatives and friends. The Soviet Union mixed people up. So plenty of Ukrainians have family and friends in Russia, and plenty of Russians, friends and family in Ukraine. The people don't want a war.
And that's a really important point, isn't it? Because any prosecution of war requires the support of people, and his legacy kind of depends on that sense that he symbolises and speaks for the Russian people. But obviously we could continue digging into that history and the complexity of the whole situation. But just to turn to Marion for a minute, if a war comes, or if an invasion comes, and of course part of what the West's strategy has been to threaten very severe consequences in the form of economic sanctions. And I'm just wondering, Marion, how effective do you think sanctions would be, especially the UK sanctions that might be imposed?
And we're talking sanctions, but at the moment there's nothing out there suggesting, just that they'll be very severe, but there seems to be no preliminary work being undertaken at Westminster at the moment. And of course, we've just gone into a week's recess, so that remains to be seen when we go back. There's so much Russian money floating about London, it's really quite difficult. And of course, an awful lot of Russian money has been floating towards the Tory party. So you have to wonder, sitting back and looking at it, how effective will the sanctions be? How will they do it in such a way that the Tory party can still get their big donations? But it has to be done properly. If this UK government are serious, they have to put in proper, hard-working sanctions that will really tie up Russian money in the UK for a long time to come, and to show Putin that they're absolutely serious about what they're saying. And I think there's always the dubiety about the efficiency of this UK government and their actual willingness to do what they say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, given that London really is awash with oligarchs' money, it's bankrolling businesses and schools and universities, football clubs. There's a lot to lose there, isn't it? And I was just reflecting that in a recent debate, Boris Johnson actually killed the economic crime bill that would have imposed much more clear regulations to avoid the washing of this kind of dirty Russian money. So I take your point about the challenges for the UK government. Before we turn to our next issue, Alan, any final thoughts on the Ukraine crisis?
Well, Marion, you're absolutely 200% spot on. I've been dealing with the sanctions issue with Belarus. I've been very closely engaged dealing with putting pressure on our government over the sanctions question. We have a wonderful priest of the Belarusian church in North London who described what Britain has done so far, or at least did in the early stages, as moral sanctions. Just enough to say we've done something. And you're quite right, Marion. That sort of thing is just simply not good enough. We've got our case history of the Belarusian oligarch, a Mr. Mikhail Gutseriev, who I'll name because he's named finally on the sanctions list. And that took a year and a half. Ridiculous. Impressions that he was being protected in some way, and that when Britain was in the EU, Britain was actually using it to keep him off the EU sanctions list. Britain left the EU, he's on the sanctions list a few months later. Finally, we got him on the British one. So all sorts of issues. And yes, the sanctions do need to be exactly what Biden is saying. Swift, decisive, and the West will have to take pain. And of course, the link with the oligarchs could be a saving grace, because there must be an awful lot of people whispering in the corridors of Kremlin power at the moment saying, this is going to hurt us. I think the message is beginning to get through. And that's another reason why I think the message from the West has been on this one so much to play for, spot on. So, yes, Marion, full agreement. So you're not getting any, sorry, you're not getting any conflicting dialogue here on that one.
Yeah, I'm delighted to hear that, Alan, because that was a masterful introduction to the whole scenario
It was.
in Ukraine. Thank you for that.
Well, on this kind of quite encouraging note, let's move on from the Ukraine and the kind of success of Western diplomacy and pressure to let's revisit what's been going on in Westminster this week, and a government which seems to be in total disarray from top downwards, with a Prime Minister under investigation, having been issued with a police questionnaire which he has to respond to within 7 days, and with a very clear injunction that he has to be truthful in his answers. And increasingly, Major, Ian Duncan Smith, some of the Tory grandees and MPs are increasingly saying that his position is untenable. And Marion, do you think this is the week that we'll see Boris Johnson resign?
I think we need a few more Russian tanks in the lawns of number 10 to get Boris Johnson out the door. I think he's going to hang on. It's what he's wanted for a very, very long time. And he's not really, from my perspective, interested in governance. He's interested in being Prime Minister. I think he will wait until the inquiry is completely finished. That's the Met inquiry. And that someone actually says to him, or maybe that someone is his wife, enough is enough. Let's get out of here. In normal circumstances, a normal PM would have been gone long since. He would have been gone at the first whiff of Partygate. He's no intention of leaving. As I say, we're in recess, so nothing really much is going to happen, and he'll just carry on until he's forcibly ejected. Now, that will require more of the Red Wall Tories to actually put their letters in, because no one knows how many letters are in. But even strong supporters of Boris are starting to say, this is enough. This is enough. But nothing, I think, will shift him personally until the Met finally come out. Now, who knows now how long that investigation will take? It should just carry on, but there are good reasons and good excuses for them to delay even further.
Yeah, and beyond this particular issue, which has, of course, been occupying such a lot of oxygen and government time and media speculation, what are some of the other signs that this government really is in a mess and is?
It's not listening. It's not listening on all sorts of. We're going to talk about cost of living, etc. But they live in their own bubble. I know what the Westminster bubble's like, but they have no idea how real people live. And that's the crux of the matter. You just had to look at the disastrous select committee appearance of the Therese Coffey, the Secretary of State for DWP. They have completely lost touch. Now, for Boris to have had his minus, I must stop calling that. It sounds as though he's a friend of mine. He tried that trip with Ian Blackford. We get on really well outside, and everybody's looking at him. Really? That's news to us. Johnson has. He has no real control. It's not cabinet government, and so they wondering if what they're doing is going to meet approval. And the thing that meets approval is really not doing terribly much that actually moves the country forward till Boris decides what he's actually going to do. It's in stasis. It's just stuck,
And that sort of sense that there's no kind of no controlling hand in the government, and that people are just wandering around. Perhaps a prime example of that this week was a our Foreign Secretary Liz Truss wandering around and finding her way to Moscow. What did you make of her performance there, Alan?
Oh my goodness. Well, I was greatly heartened to see one of our senior Foreign Office advisors sitting on one side and the British ambassador the other side. They obviously didn't whisper loud enough when Lavrov clearly pulled one by starting to reference geographical locations of Russian tanks and whether she had any right to be telling them whether to move, as I understand. And it is a complex geography. Nobody's going to learn all the names of all the regions of of Russia. But I think maybe a little bit more homework might have needed to be done to go into a meeting like that. I mean, the message got across. You would present her script. You're not going to get much controversy even on the second topic because I'm again 100% with Marion on the main point you were raising about Mr. Johnson, because as your producer knows, I was a young academic in Oxford when Mr. Johnson first arrived in the Oxford Union back in 1985-86. He was president of the Oxford Union 86, Chernobyl year. Leopards don't change their spots. The man I saw as a young 21-year-old making up stories and just saying anything at the dispatch box in the Oxford Union and talking his way out of it with flair and a bit of comedy is the man we have now. Now, Govey, he arrived at the college I was teaching at, Lady Margaret Hall, about the same time. It was very shortly after Mr. Johnson Mr. Gove was president of the Oxford Union. So he's a man who really knew Boris, and let's not forget, it's only a couple of years ago he decided he wasn't fit to be Prime Minister. So I'll leave the viewers to make a judgment as to people, with myself, the concerns I have, that I've just seen somebody who's really not changed, and all the antics that has led to the situation he's got himself into. It's nothing new, and this claim for change that we're seeing. He was well known in Oxford as a young man. He would change his spots. By the way, he started off as Conservative, and to get the Oxford Union, one of his moves was to change to Lib Dem. Didn't want to stand as Conservative. I've changed my ways. So he changes some things, but it's all cosmetic. So and as for our Liz Truss, well, I'm not sure where the Russian advice is in FCDO at the moment. We should and do have a very strong Russian advisor, and I'm sure Britain is actually. Let's respect our experts and our top diplomats. They are hugely engaged at the moment, and I have absolutely no doubt that at the expert level, an expert professional diplomatic level, Britain is playing a strong role, and I am sure we're being very effective in pulling things together. There's a lot, I'm sure, going on that is not out in the public domain, but as somebody who's personally worked closely with many of the officials in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, we might not have a respect for the political masters, and I know they have a very hard job to do with those people who are elected as our representatives and end up in senior offices of state. But let's, and I'm trying to give some hope in everything here. I think our big hope for British foreign affairs is we do have very, very strong, good, not only well-meaning, but really high-level experts on Eastern Europe and Russia in our British Foreign Office. And let's hope they'll get the chance to do their job.
Indeed so. And the same might be said to apply to Boris Johnson's great success, or so he would have us believe, which is that he got Brexit done. But again, this past week, we've seen that all kind of fragmenting and falling apart, rather particularly in Northern Ireland, where the First Minister has resigned. Marion, how do you see that situation, and how can it be resolved?
I mean, can I have a moment of pure comedy when I say that the job that Jacob Rees-Mogg has been awarded, Minister for Brexit Opportunities, he was obviously very tired after the good work he did as leader of the House of Commons, because he was effective at that. He could be a bit, he did that job and he did it well. But how he's going to find Brexit opportunities by asking the folk in the, who read The Sun to bring it forward. I think it's, but to get to a more serious note, the Northern Irish Protocol is really, really important. And there is more and more divisive noises coming from DUP who are totally now against Boris Johnson and his government. And people are now calling for early elections in Northern Ireland to try and get the whole thing back on the road, because Boris Johnson lied to Northern Ireland. He told them, no paperwork, it'll all be fine. And now here we are down the road and it's not fine, and it's causing the unionist side to feel more and more divorced from the UK mainland. And the effect it's having on Northern Ireland industries and agriculture and everything else, and the people in Northern Ireland, is now becoming more and more obvious. And it's time, again, because the government is so distracted by so many different things, some of them self-made, some of them totally serious, like the situation in Ukraine, you get the idea that people are not focusing. The Northern Ireland Secretary has spent all morning going around TV studios defending the Prime Minister and talking about Ukraine and other things, when he should be there working full-time in Northern Ireland trying to get this sorted. And I don't think this government really knows where it's going with this. Getting Brexit done was the one and only focus at the start of Johnson's premiership, and it still seems to be the one that they keep relying on, because we have to be grateful, apparently, that he's got us out of Europe.
Okay, well, we'll leave that that situation, and no doubt we'll be returning to it in the weeks ahead. But let's turn to another pillar of the establishment, the Metropolitan Police, also apparently in crisis, and of course, the Chief Commissioner Cressida Dick has resigned under pressure, certainly under pressure from Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London. Alan, do you think she was right to resign? Did she have to go?
Yes. I'll give my Scottish links to this one. I think this topic is graced by the name of a very great Scottish legal brain, Sir William Macpherson, a man from Blairgowrie. Now, I got close to the Met Police situation, not just because I'm living in southwest London, so I live with the consequences of the way the Met are managed, but my wife's father was a golfing companion of Sir William Macpherson, who golfed at Blairgowrie Golf Course regularly. He'd get back there after his hard week's work in London, and anybody who was a member of that golf club knew pretty rapidly what the summary was back in, this was the period 97 to 99. So William Macpherson was doing the report on that dreadful situation of the young man, Lawrence, who was killed, and the way the police handled that in the early 90s. And the basic summary was, they're corrupt and it needs sorted out. And that's 22 years ago. And so William Macpherson, shortly before he died in January, just last year, tomorrow is 1 year on. Anybody who knew him, and my wife is a Cooper Angus and Blairgowrie lady, the memory of Sir William Macpherson is strong in the area. These are not my words. These are the words of the man who 22 years ago made a brief speech and was commenting on this matter as recently as 2 years ago in 2019. And a sentence that rings in your ears is, there's obviously more to be done. It wasn't, and therefore the person that's responsible for that, and I'm sure Sadiq Khan saw just yet another weak approach to what is a major problem there. The litany of words, misogyny, corruption, that goes on. So yes, it does seem it's root and branch, but my goodness, why are we 22, nearly 23 years on from the Macpherson inquiry and it's not sorted out? Is it that intractable? So it's a very easy yes to the question you gave about should she have gone from me. And I just speak independently as a London person, but I just happen to have, and I guess that's why Linda wanted me here, because on most of these topics, I had a very specific channel and ear to the ground on what was going on.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. That's an interesting inside insight. But Marion, as Alan suggested, the issues go deep and long, and there's a kind of intractability about them, and apparently, quite a lot of Cressida Dick's colleagues really supported her and claimed that she was starting to do the right thing and was had really started to engage in this process of root and branch review. But what do you think needs to change? And actually, of course, the Met has been highlighted for very particular reasons, and that's that sense of complete loss of trust is very widespread and apparent. But is it the only organisation or institution that has these issues? That kind of institutionalised systemic racism, misogyny, lack of accountability. What needs to change, and how do we go about doing that? Or how does the Met? Let's just start with the Met.
Well, I mean, obviously, Cressida Dick's successor is going to be absolutely vital, and who's going to want the job? There's number one, and that's a real issue. I mean, Cressida Dick didn't exactly cover herself in glory over quite a long time. The De Menendez affair, what happened when Sarah Everard died, the Charing Cross police thing. She may have been starting to make a difference, but speaking as an outsider, because although I'm in London 3 or 4 days a week, I don't live there in the true sense. I find it really difficult to understand how she could have, in the shortish time she was in charge, because this is institutional racism, misogyny, all of corruption, all of that. You're not going to change that. What you need is a complete culture change, and that I don't think she was able to effect in her tenure. The real issue is going to be who'll take it on, who wants to take it on, and how will we get someone who is agreeable? Now, although the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, has the right to appoint, Sadiq Khan has to be able to work with that person. And if those two don't get on, that just muddies the waters even further. I think there has to be someone possibly from outside the Met, not someone that's come through it the whole way. Or I've read recently that, Sajid Javid's brother. That's the kind of appointment that I fear might happen, and then that just undermines the work that if, as Alan says, is Cressida Dick, and you've said yourself, Lesley, Cressida Dick has started to make an impression on, that could just sail straight out the window. So I think it's going to be pretty leaderless for quite a wee while, and that even if they appoint someone, because that person will have to go in and absolutely be determined from day one to effect real and meaningful change. And that's not an easy thing for anyone to do.
It's not easy, and let's set aside the corruption, the possible corruption that has been so endemic in the Met over decades. But just more generally, these kinds of cultures, which I've certainly seen myself, in some of the work that I've done on issues related to violence against women and the police response to that, and in wider society. Are we getting anywhere at all in really addressing those? Because it seems the same things keep coming up time and time and time again, and it's a particular kind of culture that it seems kind of, it's adaptable, it changes, but it never actually goes. It's never really tackled at root.
I think that's very true. But I think there have been changes every year. On International Women's Day, there's a debate in the House of Commons, usually in the chamber. And the very first one I did in 2015, I tried to look at what has happened over the last, and there's a lot of pessimism every year. Jess Phillips stands up and reads out the deaths of all the women who have been murdered by their partners in the preceding year. And that's really awful to sit and listen to it. It's awful for her to stand up and talk about. And we can say that things haven't changed, but there has been some progress. It takes a while. It does require complete and utter change in men and in women, and women's attitudes to how, and women are now standing up more and calling out misogyny. And I think that's a really, really powerful, potent and good thing to happen. But I think we have to take it on board that there have been some changes, and with more and more women, not enough numbers yet, I absolutely agree to that, but more and more women getting into positions of authority will change. We're looking at thousands of years of misogyny and bad treatment of women. It's not going to change in 20 or 30 years, but we have to go back and look to where I've come from, and the kinds of things that used to happen to me as a young woman making her way in the world, and it was in business and in academia. Things have changed. They haven't changed fast enough, but we have to keep hammering it. We have, and actually now there are more male allies than we ever used to have. So I'm hopeful for my granddaughters. It'll be a better world for them. But when you link all of that to the misogyny in an institution like policing and the Met, that's another different ballgame entirely. And that has to be hammered out, taken out root and branch. It cannot be allowed to happen. When you think back on the vigil for Sarah Everard and the way that women were being treated by police then, that has never to happen again, must never happen again. And it'll be a very strong figure that says that and actions that, even if it includes firing people in the Met, because that's not what happens. You can be misogynistic, you can send out terrible WhatsApp messages, and you still seem to be able to keep your job. That has to stop as well.
Yeah, you're right, and thanks for what you said. It's a reminder to me, having been kind of in the midst of these struggles for such a long time, that when you take the long view, really a lot has changed, and there are encouraging signs, and encouraging signs of much more male allyship of the kind that you're talking about. So, we just hope and keep working and keep struggling for those changes, and holding those responsible accountable. I think that's always the key. There has to be consequences in order for things to change. But let's move on now. And you've already mentioned, Marion, the cost of living crisis, which we're currently experiencing on the back of over a decade of austerity, and just everything that's happening. The energy price cap rise, which is 54%, I gather, from the 1st of April. So many ways in which ordinary people are struggling and are really anxious for the future. And, we saw signs of that with the protests in towns and cities across the UK yesterday. These protests organised by the People's Assembly. So Marion, I'm just going to come back to you, actually. You must have heard, among your constituents in Motherwell and Wishaw, you must have heard, a lot of concern and a lot of anxiety and stories from people about how this is impacting on them in their lives. Do you want to share, tell us a wee bit about that?
I can very much, I understand exactly what's going on. And I think the real issue here is the UK government hasn't a clue. I said it earlier, how real people live. They don't understand. It may just be a couple. I saw a very good article not so long ago where it said, if an artisan sourdough loaf goes up from £2.50 to £2.80, that's not much. But if to a person with a kind of disposable income that allows them to buy that sort of bread. But if the basic Savers loaf goes up by 10 pence, that's a huge chunk out of someone who's living literally on the breadline's income. And people are having to, and it's absolutely true. And an example locally is food bank started in a local church. I know some of the people involved there. And when grown men are coming in crying because they can't feed their families. And that's a weekly occurrence. And that was before the energy prices went through the roof. And many of the folk who are suffering even more are in work, but they're getting universal credit. They have full-time jobs, sometimes 2 part-time jobs, sometimes 3 part-time jobs, and they cannot live on what this UK government calls the living wage. It's not a living wage. They cut back on benefits. Even the uprating wasn't as much as it should have been. People are actually going to die this winter, either from hunger or from lack of heat. And that is just absolutely appalling. I'm the disability spokesperson for the SNP at Westminster, and all of the organisations I'm talking to are really, really fearful because that people cannot live on what they're being given by way of benefits. And this government has a terrible record on how it refers to benefits. Here I go, I'm announcing now, I'm on benefits. I get a state pension. I'm on benefits. And it's a pejorative term. It's not what it should be, a safety net for the weakest, most vulnerable in our society. It's just seen as people getting money for nothing. And that is at the whole heart of Tory policies on looking after the most weak and vulnerable folk in society. It's appalling. It's absolutely appalling. My first week in Westminster, I heard a Tory member say, "Why don't people on benefits save?" And that was 6.5 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, with the 2-child cap, I mean, it becomes almost personal for me. And there are folk out here I'm in Wishaw, in Motherwell and Wishaw, who are struggling and who will continue to struggle until cost of living is brought under control. Because for some people, it's a difference between heating and eating. You hear that all the time now, and this is the 21st century. Where are we in the OECD list? I can never remember where we sit in the rich list. Well, we're in the top 10 richest countries in the world.
It is. It's shameful. The whole kind of ethos that constructed and sustained the welfare state. That notion of across the whole of people's lives, there would be support for them to ensure their security and dignity to live decent lives. So these are, and your story about the food banks and the men who are coming in there, just reminds me of having heard that apparently there are now more food banks than branches of McDonald's in the UK, and that's a very telling indictment on the current situation. But it's not everybody who's struggling, is it? Because a lot of the wealthy elite, the wealthiest people in Britain and globally, have actually made a killing in recent years and are just kind of multiplying exponentially their wealth. So, Alan, what would a decent government be doing in response to this crisis?
Well, I'll again follow Marion. And by the way, I think viewers should be aware I have more than just London links. We're very fortunate to have a little former croft house up near Kinloch Bervie, which was the location where my wife in 1951 was christened. Yes, she's on benefits too, and she's disabled. And that croft house has been in our family since 1886. We've just had our first £1,000 plus quarterly bill for electricity up there because my wife went up there to celebrate what should have been our 70th, but we COVID, so we got there for our 71st just last October, and we managed to take advantage of 2-3 months up there. And I think we were maybe slightly wildly using the electricity, but my goodness, did we get a shock when the January bill came in. And that's us getting a shock. And we know the community up there. Pensioners, my wife's best friend is a retired police officer on a pension. And my goodness, we notice the prices in the local spar. And my concern is, how did we get here? It's Scotland. I lectured in energy. I know, I watched Torness being built. So there's the nuclear, the wind, the water. Scotland's a self-sufficient country, or should be, in energy. How did it get there? That's a question. I just don't understand why we have, with all that wind power coming in from the sea, all that electricity, got a really good running nuclear power station outside Edinburgh, why we're where we are. And what do you do about it? Well, what should a good government be doing? Look, I don't mind paying taxes for social need, and for the benefit we all need to share and pull together. Why we have a government that is resistant to support and welfare, I have absolutely no idea. And in that respect, I am so aware, having a foot in Scotland and a foot in Edinburgh, the contrast between the situation in Scotland. I've actually partially retired, and in the next year or two will be quite definitely scurrying back to my own hometown of Edinburgh, and I will be I am sure a much happier pensioner there, under the auspices of what the best Scotland can do for me, rather than the Westminster government. So that's probably a hint to views on what's going to be coming next. But what can they do? I'll happily pay more taxes, given that maybe I've got a little bit of largesse I can spread around.
Well, tax would certainly be a start, wouldn't it? A decent wealth tax. Marion, Alan mentioned the difference as he perceives it between the situation and reality in Scotland compared with London and with the UK government. And certainly, you know, in the Scottish budget, one of the announcements was for a new adult disability payment. Do you want to say I know Westminster, you're a Westminster politician, but nevertheless it would be interesting just to hear you say a wee bit about what that will mean.
Yeah, well, I've been talking about this at Westminster for quite a while now. It's a change. It's instead of PIP, if a personal independence payment, which as an MP is a source of a huge amount of work for me and my staff, who are fantastic at it, querying and pushing and chevying this government, and some of the ways that the degradation some people have to go through to actually be assessed as needing PIP. And whereas in Scotland, the new adult disability payment is going to be rolled out completely from August this year. And the whole ethos of the Scottish social security system is going to be based on a an entirely different set of principles. So it's fairness, dignity, and respect. Mm-hmm. People will be able to choose how they are assessed. Most of the assessments will be based on paperwork rather than getting people in and saying, can you walk for 10, is it 50 meters or so? Can you do this? Can you do that? It will be based on what medical opinion is on that person and actually how they are. And the assessor will be someone who knows a bit about their condition. Now, and that doesn't happen at the moment on PIP. So you get physiotherapists assessing people who have autism, for example, and people who back specialists who are dealing with people with mental health issues. So the assessment can go in entirely the wrong way for the claimant. The claimant can be absolutely feeling it could be a condition that changes. Some days you're better, but on your worst day you can't get out of bed, that kind of thing. And there's no cognizance taken of any of that. And most of it has been farmed out to other subcontracted out to companies who are on a sort of bonus scheme to cut the amount of benefit they actually award. That's not how it's going to work in Scotland. People who are going to be applying in the pilot areas just now will find a whole different scenario from what they would do if they were still under DWP rules. And that's actually going to improve things, because under DWP rules, the number of mandatory reconsiderations, the fact that people have to upscale to go to tribunal, and the number of tribunal decisions that are overturned is costing the UK government day and daily much more than it should, because they're having to retry these cases over and over again, and then they get the case awarded against them. So hopefully people in Scotland will see a huge difference, and that perhaps, and I never stand up in the UK Parliament and say things like it's much better in Scotland just for the sake of saying what a wonderful country Scotland is. It's because I want the UK government to think about what we're doing, take it on board and apply it in their area as well, so that people across the UK are getting a better. I mean, if someone deserves PIP or ADP, as it's known in Scotland, they should get it, and they shouldn't have to jump through hoops that are there specifically to stop them getting it, no matter where they live.
Well, thanks for explaining that, Marion, and it'll be interesting to see in practice how the rollout of this new allowance and the extent to which people who are on the sharp end really experience that change of ethos and change and perhaps are relieved, because I've certainly got friends and family who they've had such desperate stress and anxiety around the PIP assessments and so on. We're almost at the end of our hour together. So just finally, a quick comment from both of you, if you would like, on an interview that Lorna Slater, the co-convener of the Green Party in Scotland and a member of now, of course, of the Scottish Government, who said that the SNP and the Green Party are working together on a prospectus, a plan for IndyRef 2023. Any thoughts on that and how that will change our approach and people's understanding of what's going to be on offer in the hopeful referendum, if and when it comes next year? Alan, I'll come to you first. And it'll have to be quick.
Goodness. on this topic, my mind is going back to a young student myself at Edinburgh University around about 1974, an election coming up. And we had then at Edinburgh University a brilliant professor of law, Professor Neil McCormack. And I sat in on a speech he made, which, as we would expect of such a great legal brain, he was chair of public law and law of nature and nations at Edinburgh University. And he made the case, and it's rather interesting, he was law of nature and nations, this sort of linkage in Scotland of the importance of the environment, but also the importance of our historic link to Europe. I just feel it's so indigenous, and anybody who, I hope somewhere on paper there is that speech that I listened to, and hence force the very clear case. And I hope somewhere, and I don't know, I'm not close to too much to SNP politics, but I hope SNP has somewhere got a similar brain to Neil McCormack, who I think would have cut right through any of the Westminster rhetoric as to whether this Indie Ref should happen or not, and let it roll out. So my view is, anything positive that brings together issues of environment and Europe in a strong coalition that will lead to a future that the Scottish people want, and that's the important thing, a democratic decision of the Scottish people. I'm all for that.
Thank you, Alan. Marion, you've got a minute.
Well, the 2021 election for the Scottish Parliament gave us a majority for independence, and that the Greens, the SNP and the Greens, are simply carrying out the mandate they were given last year. So the government will produce, and that's in spite of Ian Murray and his silly civil servants do the bidding of government, and government do the bidding of the people that elected them. So there's a mandate there for putting forward the case for a 2023 independence referendum, and I wish it was 2023 again, now, because it's important that the government sticks to its mandate. There will also be, and Lorna Slater said this as well, there'll be a Greens manifesto for independence, and there'll also be an SNP one. But we're moving in the right direction. In 2021, the Scottish people elected an SNP and Greens majority for a mandate for an independence referendum. And the well-known words of whoever, bring it on. We're ready, we have to prepare for it, and it should be an interesting and exciting time. And when people like Ian Murray and Alistair Jack bemoan this fact, they're going in the face of democracy. And there's absolutely no right to do so, in my humble, and sometimes not so humble opinion.
Well, thank you very much for that final word, Marion, and thanks to you, to both of you, Marion and Alan, for a really stimulating and well-informed hour of discussion. Thanks very much, and goodbye to everybody, because we're winding up now. And if you enjoy this programme, and you appreciate and value the importance of an independent broadcasting service in Scotland, covering the news from these different perspectives and angles, your support is most welcome and encouraged, and you can certainly make a contribution by following that link that's appearing on the bottom of the screen there. So please do consider that. If we are going to move forward in the spirit that both Alan and Marion have spoken about, we really need independent voices to carry the conversation forward. So thanks very much to everybody, and good afternoon to you all.